Hey there, welcome to episode 165 of Mike's Collection. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is some new Transformers figures. Now, I've got 4 Transformers here to talk about today. 2 of them are quite new to me. I just got one in the mail 2 days ago. This guy here, Sharkticon, I picked up about a week ago, and the other 2 figures are figures that I got before Christmas, and I did talk about them briefly in my kind of best of 2021 list because I got them right before I had done that video, so I never really had a chance to spend a whole lot of time really kind of focusing and reviewing the figure and showing you. So if you've watched my videos regularly, you've probably seen these last 2 figures briefly, but I want to spend a little bit more time on them. Anyway, with just 4 figures to go over today, this should be a relatively quick episode. So without any further ado, let's dive into these new Transformers. So here are Jackpot and his sidekick Sights inside of the box. This is a very underwhelming box. It's a little better than the plain brown mailer boxes that the Selects figures used to come in, but this Golden Disc collection isn't much better. However, the back side of this box does feature a picture of the toy in both vehicle and robot mode, which again is a big step up from the brown mailer boxes we were getting on the Selects figures. So even though you can't see the actual toy, and you'd think some nice painted artwork on the front might really draw people's attention, the fact that you can see clearly what the toy looks like on the back of the box, that should go a long way in helping stores move these items. So, I just got this in. It's brand new, sealed. So let's pop this guy open and take a look at him here. We'll just slice right along there. And there we go. So there is our figure. Well, both figures, I guess. In the back here, we've got our instruction booklet. But yeah, so he's a small little guy. So we just got to kind of undo these twist ties, and then we'll take a look at the figure outside of the packaging. So here is Jackpot and his little buddy Sights outside of the box. So it's a pretty nice figure. I was a little surprised at how small he was when I opened up the box. Like, he is, I guess, about the right size for this grade of Transformers. There's all kinds of different classifications of Transformers, and I can never remember what they're all called. There's Voyager class and Deluxe class, and yeah, off the top of my head, I can't remember what class he is, but I guess he's about the right size. But for some reason, I still expected him to be a little bigger, but he's a pretty small little figure here. But it's a nice figure. He's got a brand new head sculpt. So I like that head sculpt, although it's a little unclear what's going on there. I think he's got like a visor across his eyes, and then he has an exposed mouth, like a human-like mouth on there. This is not a character I'm very familiar with, so and I'm gonna guess that a lot of you might not be familiar with him too. I think you'd have to be a pretty hardcore Transformers fan to really know this guy. And I actually was not even planning on buying this figure. I usually stick to buying just Generation 1 Transformers of characters that I loved when I was a kid. Either I had the toy when I was a kid, or I wanted the toy when I was a kid, or they were featured in the cartoons or the comic books that I had as a kid. I'm not really interested in most modern Transformers. Like, even the Beast Wars, they came around when I was like a teenager, and I didn't really care about those. So when they make new Beast Wars figures now, I usually skip them. And when they make characters like this that I'm not familiar with, at first glance, I don't know. It's like, maybe this is based off some obscure G1, like Generation 1 figure, or maybe it's a brand new character they came up with. It really kind of depends on the figure. Like, if it's a cool looking figure, even if I don't have any ties to my childhood, I'll buy it. But if it seems like kind of a cash grab by Hasbro and I don't have any attachment to it, I'll often pass. And this guy here was going to be a pass for me. Now, maybe if he was a regular retail toy and I saw him in the store, I might have bought him. But the thing is, you saw that box he came in. He's part of what they call the Gold Disc collection, which is kind of a continuation of their Selects line. And these are kind of collector-based figures. They're usually exclusives, either online or to certain stores. So it's not the kind of thing you're just going to find hanging on a peg at Walmart or Target or anything. So you kind of have to really want this figure to seek him out. So this guy, I know he was available exclusively on Hasbro's website, HasbroPulse.com. He might have been available at other sites like Amazon or something. I'm not sure. Because there was another one of these gold disc sets that I did buy. It was a little 2-pack with Puffer and Road Ranger. Now, those were 2 characters I didn't have any childhood attachment to, but I just really liked the look of the figures. So I bought those. I got those from Amazon. And I got those just before Christmas. If you recall, one of those figures, Puffer, actually made my best of the year list. But when it came to this guy, Jackpot, I saw them market him and say, this is our next golden disc figure, Jackpot. He's available online. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to pass on that guy. Now, I hadn't heard of him, and that was kind of the reason I skipped him. And so he's been available. I could have got him before Christmas. I didn't. But then it was my brother's birthday this past February 1st. And I was trying to think what I should get my brother Doug for his birthday. He wasn't really giving me many ideas. Although I know he had been kind of envious of my Excalibur 3-pack from Marvel Legends, which consisted of Captain Britain, his girlfriend Megan, and Shadowcat. So I'd bought that for myself, and Doug had not, and he liked that set, so I thought, well, that's only available at Hasbro Pulse. Maybe I'll order that for him for his birthday. So I did, but then I thought, well, if I'm ordering from Hasbro Pulse, the shipping from these guys is usually pretty expensive, so I feel I need to order something else to help justify the shipping cost. So I actually ended up buying a G.I. Joe figure, which I also gave to my brother, and I bought this guy here. So I ended up with him kind of more of just a matter of circumstance than really seeking him out. But now that I have him in hand, I really like him. He's a cool figure. I'm glad I got him. And to kind of justify my purchase even, I decided to look up this guy a little bit to see what his deal was. And apparently, the original Jackpot figure was released in 1990. So that's really kind of the tail end of the G1 Transformers. I had stopped collecting it at that point in time. But he was from a line called the Action Masters, which I don't think was very well received by kids back then because it was a line of Transformers that did not transform. So it had characters like Optimus Prime and Bumblebee that people were familiar with their robot modes, but then they also added new characters like Jackpot here and characters like Bunzaitron, and these were brand new characters that kind of looked like they should transform because they had like a grill, they looked like they had car modes, but they didn't. And so I guess fans weren't super keen on those. That was the only official Jackpot figure ever released until just now. And this character has actually appeared in some of the comic books published by IDW. Not really in any sort of starring role, but he has been featured in a lot of kind of background stories and stuff. And so that kind of helps expand, his background a little bit more, kind of inserts him into the world. And after kind of realizing that, I've read about this guy in comic books, and he's directly from G1 continuity, he's not some weird foreign repaint, I kind of felt justified in adding him to my collection. And like I said, he's pretty cool. I'm not going to transform him into a car, but he transforms into a Porsche. I never really transform my Transformers because I like just the robot modes. For accessories, he's got this blue gun here, and it comes with a little removable blast effect made out of translucent soft orange rubber, so that's cool. And he also comes with sights, so this is a little pterodactyl guy. And he can actually be used as a weapon as well, so you just got to pull this thing down, and you tuck his head down, and basically he becomes an axe, so he can fit in his hand like so. So there you go, that's pretty cool. Now, a little bit more about this guy. So the original came out in 1990, so that was a brand new original mold, because like I said, he wasn't based on any previous Transformers, he was a new guy. But he had some similarities. A lot of transforming car guys do look the same with the front of the car, along the front there, the windshield in the back. That's how a lot of guys had similar transformations. So when it came time to give us this new version of Jackpot that actually transforms, they went with Jazz as one of the original Transformers, and they redecoed him and gave him a new head to give us this guy. Now, sometimes that can be a little annoying when you get a figure and then you keep having to buy it again in new paint schemes because you're like, man, I just keep paying for the same thing. Now, when it comes to Jazz, this is the Jazz that I have in my collection. The one and only Jazz I have in my collection. Now, I actually never had him when I was a kid, even though he was one of the original Transformers that came out in 1984. Neither me nor my brother Doug had Jazz. And he was not really my favorite character. I didn't really like the way he talked, like his speech pattern in the cartoon. I'm not really into sports cars. So yeah, Jazz didn't really feel like an essential guy to me. But when I started collecting Transformers as an adult in like the mid 2000s, I think it was around 2005 or so when they first started releasing new versions of these G1 characters, I decided I wanted to get a nice definitive version of every G1 character for my collection. So it started with a Bumblebee, and I slowly built up a collection from there. And this Jazz here was released in 2010. This is from the Reveal the Shield collection. So you can see here how he looks with the front of the car here, the windshield in the back. He's got that visor, except a little different from Jackpot there, in that he's got a visor, but he's got a nose and a mouth, not just a mouth. But I am almost surprised that they went through the trouble of creating a new head for him, because it seems like his head's almost close enough. They could have just reused that, but I very much appreciate that they gave him a new head. Now you'll notice that this figure is not the same as this figure. Like I said, this one's from 2010, and it was good enough for me. I still think it's a pretty solid Jazz figure. But a lot of these characters that I got in the like mid 2000s, they have released new versions of over the years. Some of my characters I have upgraded when I thought that they made better versions. But with Jazz, none of the versions they put out really, I thought, were an improvement enough over this figure. And also, he wasn't one of my favorites, so I didn't really feel the need to have the absolute best version. But another reason why I almost didn't buy this guy is because just about, I think it was 2020, I got this figure here. Now, this is a character called Ricochet or Stepper. And this character was one of those selects figures that came in the little brown mailer box. And this is also a redeco of Jazz. So this is a character, he originally came out only in Japan in 1987, and he was a redeco of the original 1984 Jazz. And then this figure here, they released a Jazz in 2017 as part of a line called Power of the Primes, which I did not get. But they redecoed that 2017 Power of the Primes Jazz into this character Ricochet. And at the time of buying him, I was like, I didn't have any history of this character. Like I said, he was only released in Japan. He wasn't a character from the cartoons or the comics. And I was like, do I really need this guy? And I thought, well, what the hell? He's a new character. It'll add some variety to my Transformer shelf, so I bought him. But when I saw this guy, at a glance, in my mind, I was thinking he looked a lot more like him than I thought. I'm like, this is just another character who's black and yellow, another redeco of Jazz. He's a lot like Ricochet. I don't really think I need him. But now that I have him in hand, I realize, oh, these guys actually are quite different. And again, you'll notice, even though these are all redecos of Jazz, this guy, again, is a totally different figure from this guy even. Because while this is a repaint of a 2017 Jazz, this is the repaint of a 2020 Jazz that was released as part of the Studio series. And so that was another new Jazz figure that I passed on. So it's kind of nice that these guys are all based on the same character. And had I upgraded my Jazz in the years since I bought this one in 2010, you know, he would look the same size and have very similar to all these other figures. But as it turns out, I've bought all these redecos over the span of, you know, about 12 years or so. So they end up all looking quite different. And yeah, I feel pretty justified in having them all in my collection, and they're all pretty cool. One last thing I'll mention about Sights there. So his little sidekick. So that's just a quick redeco of another character that was released in 2019. So there was a figure called Pterodaxon, which I don't have, but then it was re-released as Pterodactyl, and this is Pterodactyl. These little guys are pretty cheap. They sell some of these characters on their own, like carded. I never felt the need to buy these little guys because I think they're kind of overpriced. But this guy was a pack-in with a Skywarp figure I bought in 2019. So there you go. So get Skywarp, Pterodactyl. So it's cool now. I've got two little pterodactyl buddies to hang out with these guys. I don't think I have anything more to say about Jackpot, but he's pretty cool. And I guess one last thing I'll add is usually when they take a pre-existing figure and then they take another pre-existing figure like this, a little Target Master guy, and they include him in the package, usually they up the price by about $10 or so. So if this figure is usually 30, this guy's usually about 10. Put them together, the package is 40, which I guess makes sense. But it's a little bit of a piss off because usually I want the big character and then just throw in one of these little junky guys to up the price, and it kind of annoys me. But in this case, this guy was just a standard price. They didn't up the price when they included this guy, and that's pretty rare. So this guy is essentially a little bonus, and yeah, pretty cool. So Jackpot and Sights. So next up, we're going to take a look at the brand new Studio Series Sharkticon. This guy was just released, I guess, probably pretty late in 2021. So he's pretty new to me. And this figure, it's pretty cool. This character is somebody that I really love. It was introduced in the animated Transformers movie in 1986. And it's, I think, probably the only figure that I got based on that movie. Like, I did not get a Hot Rod figure. I did not get a Galvatron or a Cyclonus. All the big new characters. Because I've talked about this before, but me and I think a lot of other kids had pretty mixed feelings about that movie. Because the movie came out, the idea was to wipe out the old toy line that kids already had and to introduce a bunch of new characters. And the executives thought that the kids would just love that. But they didn't, because there had been 2 seasons of cartoons and years worth of comic books that made us really fall in love with characters like Optimus Prime and even bad guys like Megatron. So when that movie came along and they all got wiped out, in the first act, it was kind of jarring because characters in cartoons and stuff did not die. So to see these characters, with big holes blasted in their chests with their eyes faded to black, it was a little traumatic. And so even though they placed Optimus Prime with Rodimus Prime and they replaced Megatron with Galvatron, I held a bit of a grudge against those characters who had replaced characters that I already really liked. Well, with the Sharkticon, one thing he had going for him, so he was a brand new character introduced in that movie, and he wasn't really replacing anybody. So I didn't have that same grudge against him. Plus, he turns into, I don't want to say a shark, like he's called a Sharkticon, but he looks nothing like any type of shark I or anybody else has ever seen. But I think it's even cooler that he doesn't, because I love his weird little monster design. And I love monsters. I mentioned before how I don't really care about Transformers transforming, and that's because I don't care about cars and trucks, but I do like dinosaurs and animals and stuff. So some of my favorite characters are the guys that transformed into dinosaurs and creatures like this, which I know is kind of odd because I also said earlier that I don't really care about Beast Wars, which is true. I think I was just too old when Beast Wars came around. But I just didn't like the look of them because they transformed into like furry animals and it was all CG animation. When it comes to G1 Transformers with the classic hand-drawn animation, and they turned into animals, but it was always robotic looking animals, like they had all kinds of panels and metallic pieces and stuff. And I think I prefer that aesthetic when it comes to my transforming beasts. So all that to say is that I really liked the Sharkticon. So I had that original 1986 figure. Like every Transformer figure of the 80s, it didn't quite match up with what the character on screen, like it wasn't as cool as you wanted it to be. I remember it being a pretty big, bulky toy, but at the same time he was very stiff. He couldn't move a whole lot. He looked fat. It was kind of a goofy, squatty looking toy, but it looked pretty cool in its shark mode from what I recall. Now, unfortunately, I got rid of that toy in my early teens and I haven't had it since. But when I started collecting Transformers again in the mid 2000s, Sharkticon was definitely something I was hoping that Hasbro would release an upgrade of. However, it took a long time. They did not upgrade the Sharkticon until 2016. And it wasn't until 2016 when it was called Titan's Return that Hasbro finally released a new Sharkticon, and it looked like this. So he looks okay. I like the sculpting on him and everything, but this guy is like a really minuscule little Transformer. He's teeny. He's probably about a third the size of the original toy from the 80s. So to wait 30 years for an upgrade and then to be given this little thing, it was pretty underwhelming. Like you can see the back there, it looks like they didn't even try. So I was glad to get a Sharkticon, but he was pretty underwhelming. So before we talk about this guy, one thing I want to talk about is in the meantime, while I was waiting for Hasbro to make a new figure, and I couldn't even wait for this guy, so like I said, he came out in 2016. In 2014, I decided to take matters into my own hands, and I bought a third-party Sharkticon. So if you're not familiar with third parties, they were they remain very popular now, but I think maybe 10 years ago they were way more popular. And that's because these third-party companies were making unofficial, unlicensed version of Transformers characters. Usually they were coming out of like Japan, maybe China, and they were really good quality figures, and they were figures we wanted, and we couldn't figure out why Hasbro wasn't making these characters. So I bought lots of third-party Transformers at the time. Now, mind you, in the years since, Hasbro has made a lot of those characters, and I've replaced some of the third-party Transformers on my shelves with official Hasbro releases. Now, when it comes to the Sharkticons, because it's not a single character, there's a whole army of Sharkticons, I'm going to display all of my Sharkticons on my shelf. So here is the third-party Sharkticon that I got in 2014. So this was produced by a company called iGear, and you can see the similarities, as far as the color scheme go, size-wise, I think this is an appropriate size for a Sharkticon to be. He's got those teeth, kind of around the front and back of his head. So the design is very similar. And even though this one definitely has things going for it because it's the official release, this guy here has some really cool kind of stylized effects. Like, for example, sharks in nature have multiple rows of teeth. So I really love how he's got these multiple rows there on the top and the bottom. It really looks kind of dangerous. For his head, you'll notice he's got like a big scar across one of his eyes, and one of his eyes is burnt out. So that's a cool little effect. I just like a lot of the elements about this toy. I don't really love the legs. The legs look kind of small and they're pretty hollow there. So he's got this big bulky top, but then the little almost comical legs. It wasn't a deal breaker for me, but I definitely do like the thicker legs on this new official release of the Sharkticon from Hasbro. Now, just another thing about the third-party guys is they came in a 3-pack, which was kind of annoying because these third-party Transformers are kind of expensive, and so to force me to buy 3 of the same character was a little frustrating. But at least the Sharkticons, as I mentioned, are an army builder, so having 3 of them on my shelf wasn't so bad. And this is a character where I would actually want to display him in both his robot mode and his alternative mode, which isn't how I feel about Optimus Prime and Bumblebee. But with the Sharkticon, I'm kind of torn. Do I display him as a robot or as a shark? So with the 3-pack, I had the best of both worlds. So here is the same toy in shark mode. So you can see how cool he looks there, again, with all those rows of teeth. So a very cool figure. So I've got, on my shelf currently, I display 1 as a robot and 2 in shark mode, which I think is my preferred mode because they're just so cool and freaky looking. So there you go. So that is the third-party Sharkticon. That's Hasbro's old Sharkticon. So let's talk about this guy a little bit. So I think he's pretty great. I think the sculpt and everything looks very true to the movie. Since he's part of the studio series, they really are trying to call back the look of the movie. The packaging on this guy and everything, has a lot of images and stuff directly from the animated movie in 1986. So he works pretty well as a robot. Now, I haven't tried him in shark mode. I'm actually going to transform this guy because I might keep him on my shelf in shark mode. I'm not sure. But yeah, so this is rare for me where I actually have to transform a Transformer figure. So before I do that, we'll just take a look at him in robot mode. You see he's got a gun there. He's got this whip, ball, and chain, and this will double as his tail once we transform him. Yeah, so the sculpting's all cool. I like, he doesn't have any really big hollow parts. Everything kind of works. It's a cool toy. But you'll notice this keeps happening. This is kind of annoying. He feels very, loose. Like this thing here, I feel like it should have a tab that locks in place. It just it's very loose and it just flops around. And I feel that way with all of his arms, his legs. Look at his legs here. They just keep dangling and falling apart. He's just very loosey-goosey. And I wish there was a little bit more ratchet joints on there that held him together a little bit better. So yeah, that's a little bit frustrating. But otherwise, I think he looks pretty cool. And yeah, so let's transform him and see what he looks like in shark mode. Okay, so here is the Studio Series Sharkticon in shark mode. And I gotta say, that was pretty disappointing. The transformation wasn't overly difficult. I forget how many steps it was in the instruction booklet, but it only took me a minute or 2 to do. And yeah, it's kind of weird. And it's hard to describe a little bit. He still feels a little like loose and not very stable. His tail there, so he's got a little bit of movement on the tail. The gun, you have the option to plug that into the side like that. You don't have to, but yeah, just his build. He feels a little weird. He's too loose, and I really don't like the shape of him. It doesn't look as round as I remember kind of the other Sharkticons looking. And like his jaw still just feels very loose here, and the fact that his head is just sitting in there, like I feel like that should have been tucked away somehow. Yeah, it's really underwhelming, especially when we bring back in this version here. Like these guys were about the same size robot, but as a shark, the third party one is much more menacing, and like you open the mouth on him there. There's no head obviously sitting in there. The arms, they move much better. They're on like ball joints, so you got more range of movement with the arms going up and down. Now this guy, he has elbows that the other guy doesn't have, but you can't move this arm out, so it's just up and down, and they feel very high up on his head, like they're almost on his cheeks. It looks weird. I'm not digging it. So I think it's obvious I'm going to display this guy on my shelf as a robot mode. But yeah, that's kind of too bad. This is my first Studio Series Transformer that I bought, actually. Most of the Studio Series figures have been based on the live-action Michael Bay movies, and it's only in the past few months that they've started releasing Studio Series based on the 86 animated movie, which are right up my alley. But so far, they've only done characters that I already had pretty decent versions of, like Jazz and Hot Rod. There's a couple that I'm thinking of picking up, like Perceptor and stuff. But I was hoping they'd be a little better than this. This feels kind of cheap and loose, and in both modes. So yeah, a little underwhelming with the Sharkticon, but still, it's I think it's an upgrade from like this little guy that we had from Hasbro. So I guess there's that. So the last two figures I want to talk about are from the Transformers R.E.D series from Hasbro, and the R.E.D stands for Robot Enhanced Designs. And these are Hasbro's new line of non-transforming Transformers. So I totally understand why some Transformers fans might not have any interest in this line, but for me, it was right up my alley. As I mentioned, I don't really care about transforming my Transformers for the most part. I really just want them to look like they did in the cartoons and the comic books. And that's such a struggle, even for like really good modern day Transformers where they put in the effort. There's still often a lot of extra bits. There's tires, there's doors, and they end up with just extra kibble hanging off of the design. When the Transformers in the cartoons and the comic books were pretty sleek or pretty boxy, but pretty simple. So this looks like Bumblebee in the cartoon, and I think it's great. I think this is an awesome figure. And if you did watch my prior video where I was kind of debating on what figures would make my best of list, you saw me kind of hum and haw a little bit about this figure because it is like an amazing looking Bumblebee. I love it. But it's got some problems too. So the biggest problem with this figure is its size. So the Transformers R.E.D series, you know, I was a little surprised when I got the first wave of them that they felt kind of small to me. Like Hasbro has their line of 6-inch classified G.I. Joe figures now. So here is a classified G.I. Joe, 6 inches tall. So when I found out they were going to make a line of Transformers, I kind of thought, okay, well, they'll be about the same size or slightly bigger. But here's Optimus Prime when compared to a G.I. Joe. And you see, he's kind of small. And Optimus Prime is supposed to be one of the bigger Transformers. So it just seemed a little out of whack that scale-wise, you know, Optimus Prime and Megatron's the same way. You know, they were a little shorter than other 6-inch lines. Like, they're shorter than Star Wars Black Series. They're shorter than Marvel Legends. And it just seemed like kind of an odd choice. Anyway, when it comes to Bumblebee here, he is like the same size. He almost looks like bigger than Optimus Prime because he's a bulkier, kind of like a little bit more of a rounder figure. and it kind of looks like Bumblebee could take Optimus Prime in a fight if he wanted to, and that just doesn't really sit well with me or with a lot of collectors. Like, even though this is a 6-inch scaled line, you have to make the characters proportionate. So if you have, say, Devastator or Omega Supreme, even though it's a 6-inch line, those figures need to be like 12 inches or more. And Bumblebee, as a short character, this guy should only be like 4 or 5 inches so that he looks right next to Optimus Prime. You can't just make all the characters the same height. It's just kind of weird. So that is a huge strike against this figure. However, that aside, the sculpt I think is great. And you know, he moves well. He's got, you know, articulated elbows. He's got articulated knees there. There you go. Bit of a ratchet there, which is good. So he holds the pose. You can see he's got ball joints there in the ankles. So he's got a good range of movement there. So you could have him do the splits, and he can still stand flat with his feet. You know, he turns at the waist, turns at the head, arms, pretty good range of movement there. They could be a little bit better than that, I think, and maybe it does. Yeah, there we go. I haven't moved this guy much, so he's a little stiff, but yeah, you can see he's got a good range of movement on the arms. I think it could probably come up to a full 180 like that. Turn the elbow, swivel there, so there's a swivel there, and at the elbow, and at the wrist. So this is what I want out of my Transformers. I want them to move like action figures, so that if I wanted to integrate them with, say, my G.I. Joe figures, you know, you could have them get in a fist fight or something instead of just banging two stiff figures together, which you often had to do with old Transformer toys. The other strike against this guy is, you might have noticed, this front part of him keeps wobbling around like that, and there is no like obvious justification for why they would do that. Although you can see how his another joint there works, kind of an ab crunch for him, so if you want him to bend over. But yeah, it's just kind of a weird thing. Like, Bumblebee doesn't take his chest off in the cartoons or comic books. And the fact that I don't mind that it's removable, but I wish it just stayed in place a little better. That one little peg kind of makes it slide around a little bit. There should at least be 2 pegs, so maybe it stayed in place. So that's a weird thing. I don't like that it's kind of moving around like that. I talked about this a little bit in my other video. I think the reasoning for that is that they're probably going to reuse this body for Cliff Jumper, because Bumblebee and Cliff Jumper always were pretty much identical, except Cliff Jumper has a bit of a spoiler on the back of his car. So rather than have to sculpt a whole new torso, they could just sculpt this with a little spoiler and add it onto this body. So that would be a cheap way to reuse this figure, which, that seems kind of lame to me. But that might not be the reason. That's just me speculating. Anyway, for accessories, you see he's got a gun. He had it in his hand a minute ago. And he's got a couple of blast effects with that gun. So some translucent yellow blasts here, so they can plug into the gun like so. He also had a couple of closed fists, so if you want to have him punching somebody. And then he also came with an Energon Cube, which is just this translucent pink box. And this is basically the food for the Transformers. It was featured a lot in the cartoon and everything, so it's kind of a cool little add-on accessory with him as well. Alright, he's not holding his gun very well, as you can see. But anyway, great figure. I really love the look of it. Very simple, very, true to the cartoons. I just wish his sizing was a little bit different. I talked about Bumblebee earlier when I said I started collecting Transformers again as an adult. So I got rid of most of my toys, most of my Transformer toys when I was a kid, like an early teenager, 13 years old or so. And then when I was in my early 20s, I started collecting toys again because G.I. Joe came back in 2002, Masters of the Universe came back in 2002, and I was kind of waiting for Transformers to get revived. It took a couple of years, but it was actually 2006 when they started releasing their Classics line, and that line had just gone on, and really it never stopped. They started with Classics, it became Generations, and it became like Reveal the Shield, and then Power of the Primes, Titans Return, right into our most recent War for Cybertron. So they've kind of continued on, and this is the first kind of modern Transformer I got back in 2006. This is the Transformer that started the line. This is from the very first wave, and this is still the Bumblebee in my collection. I still really like this figure. It's not perfect. Like, he doesn't transform into a Volkswagen Beetle, which I think is kind of a necessity, but, you know, he's got a nice sculpt as far as his head and everything goes. You know, he moves well. The colors are right. He's the right size. Like, he's much bigger and more detailed and more articulated than the vintage, like, 1984 Bumblebee figure. But he's still to scale with characters like Optimus Prime and stuff. You see, like, that looks much better. So this is still a great Bumblebee, and this guy's not going to replace him on my shelf. I think I'm probably going to end up displaying these R.E.D series guys in a completely different space from my transforming Transformers. But yeah, this does make me question whether I'm going to go super deep on this R.E.D line, because Super 7 is already putting out a line of non-transforming Transformers of their own. They're going to start delivering those this year. So once I start getting some of Super 7's Ultimate Transformers, I might really have to start getting choosy if they're releasing the same characters as Hasbro does in the R.E.D series. I don't know if I really need two 6-inch non-transforming versions of these characters, so I'll have to choose one or the other. I think Super 7's probably got them beat as far as quality and accessories and sculpt, but I think Hasbro is definitely winning the battle as far as pricing goes. So who knows what the future holds for my non-transforming Transformers collection. But anyway, this Bumblebee, despite its flaws, I still think it's pretty cool. So the last figure I want to talk about today is this Transformers R.E.D series Starscream. So this is, again, Hasbro's non-transforming line of Transformers. And they're not for everybody, but it definitely scratches a certain itch for me. I think this is a really cool looking Starscream. Perhaps the coolest looking Starscream in my collection. But it has its flaws as well. And I was really torn about buying this guy, because the Transformers R.E.D series was announced right around the same time as Super 7 announced their Ultimates line. And I was worried that they were going to be, you know, duplicating characters and stuff. And we haven't really seen much of that yet. But Starscream was one of the figures that was made available for pre-order from Super 7 for their Wave 1 figures. So I pre-ordered that. And I did that before I knew that Hasbro was planning on releasing this version of Starscream here. So when they did put out this figure, and I found him in Walmart, I think it was, I was like, do I buy this? You know, because I've got a non-transforming Starscream coming already, and it will probably be better than this one. But I thought, you know what the hell? I'll try it anyway. Starscream's a cool character. You can never really have too many of them. Or so I keep telling myself. But anyway, so let's take a closer look at him here. So, really great design in the head sculpt there. You know, he kind of looks cocky. He's got that little smirk that he usually does. All the paintwork here, I love. You know, all these little grills are painted. The gold paint there on his cockpit. You know, it's simple. You know, they could have done, say, like a wash of black paint, which would bring out all the details here. But that kind of would go against the premise of this line is to kind of look like characters right out of the cartoon. So the colors are bright, simple. The design is blocky, but sleek. You know, he doesn't have a whole bunch of extra junk hanging off of him anywhere. So very cool. And articulation, it'll be the same as Bumblebee. So you can see he can get his arms right up there. He's got a good ratchet on the knee, so he can get his legs pretty far back. The ankles, you know, everything I already talked about with Bumblebee. So pretty cool. He's got these guns here, which can be plugged onto his arms. He could also probably hold them. You know what? I'm not sure about that. Because you see here, I've got him displayed with some open hands. Let's take a look at his accessories. So he did come with some closed fists, but there's no hole in them to plug the gun into. So you know what? I don't think he could hold the guns. So not a big deal. I don't think you normally... Why would you hold the guns when you can mount them on your arms? But they do seem a little loose there when they're mounted to the arm. He's also got a couple of blast effects here, so similar to Bumblebee, except his are a little bit more... They're bigger, they're a different color, they're a little bit more dynamic. So there you go, you get a pretty big blast out of there. Although I'm thinking these are probably going to be too heavy for the guns. I could see in time this gun warping. And that's another thing I want to talk about this figure, is he feels very rubbery. Like he's very gummy. Like I feel like I could just smush him up into a ball in my hand. And I'm not sure why that is. None of the other R.E.D series figures feel that way. But this guy just has yeah, like a softness to him, a rubberiness. And I'm not sure why that is. It's a weird feel. Anyway, so for other accessories, he also has his crown. And this is an accessory right from the 1986 movie, when after he thought he killed Megatron and he crowned himself the new leader of the Decepticons. So that's cool because they've released many King Starscream figures in the past, but it was usually like kind of a separate figure from the standard Starscream. So it's cool that they give you these pieces right here. So you can choose to have him either as King Starscream or not. I don't know about how that fits on him. I don't really like the look of it. And he also has a cape, which is something else he wore as King Starscream. So you see here it's got some little holes in there. You plug the holes on these shoulder pads. Anyway, and then the shoulder pads just kind of slide on over his arms. So I don't think I'm going to display him with the cape, but I guess perhaps I'll try and put it together so you guys can see what it looks like. You know what? After messing around with it for a few minutes, I'm not even going to bother. It's a bit of a struggle, so if you have to put the cape around that knob, and then you'll see on the back of his shoulders there's a hole, so then that gets plugged into it like that. But in trying to get that on there, I ended up knocking his gun off, and his wing fell off here. And yeah, I just didn't really feel like wrestling with it because I was just going to take it right off again anyway. But I'm sure once you attach it to him, it probably would stay in place pretty well with those pegged shoulders. But anyway, I like my Starscream looking more standard. So I'll bring out my default Starscream for now. Starscream is a character I have upgraded a couple times over the years. So this here is my Siege version of Starscream. I really like this figure. You can see the similarities. But again, you know, they both have their flaws. This guy here, I think he's got a little too much kibble on him. Like you see this plane on the back, it's basically just slapped onto his back like a big old backpack. You know, they end up with those hollow spots. This guy is pretty good about not having big hollow spots on his back. But, you know, he's a little busy. And the fact that he needs to transform can sometimes hinder the articulation and all that sort of stuff. Where this guy here, he doesn't have to worry about it. You just get to focus on the sculpting and everything. And if you're somebody that likes the Transformers cartoon, I don't think there's any denying that this guy looks more like the cartoon than this guy does. So, both great figures, depending on what you're into, I guess. We'll see how it holds up compared to Super 7's release once I get that later this year. But for now, yeah, those are my Transformers. And let's wrap this up. Before I go, I thought you might just want to see how Starscream scales with the other figures in the line. So he actually looks to be the tallest out of these guys here. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I always imagined these three characters all to be about the same size. So even though I'd probably prefer Megatron to be a bit bigger than the other guys, it's fine. That wouldn't bother me. But again, Bumblebee should not be equal to all of these characters. So that's still a strike against Bumblebee. But size-wise, I think Starscream looks pretty good. So those are my latest Transformer releases. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button and leave me some comments below. It's always very much appreciated. So I will be back soon with another video. Until then, ciao.